In the haze of studio lights and curated applause, the night began with a calculated tension, masked by entertainment's gloss. Trevor Noah sat poised behind his desk, the practiced wit ready on his tongue, his smile slightly sharpened for the occasion. Across from him, Ibrahim Traoré entered the set not as a politician, but as a man carrying the weight of buried histories, misunderstood dignity, and invisible battles. The interview was marketed as a cultural exchange, a meeting of minds. Yet beneath the surface there lingered the expectation of mockery dressed as charm. The studio audience was primed for laughter. Cameras panned, capturing every twitch, every glance. Trevor opened with light banter, jokes laced with references to African military garb, to Burkina Faso's struggles, to the cliché of strongman, leadership. The audience responded, but Ibrahim remained still, absorbing every word. When Trevor smirked and asked, "So, boots in Parliament, are those your new democratic credentials?" The moment broke. Ibrahim didn't reply. He stood, walked calmly to the desk, and tapped the surface with the heel of his boot, once, twice, then returned to his seat. The studio fell into stunned silence. That simple motion, that deliberate beat, shook the entire illusion. It was not violence, but confrontation. Not comedy, but clarity. As the producer's voice cracked over the headset, cutting to a commercial, no one knew they had just witnessed the first crack in a crumbling pedestal. The viral clip hit within minutes, while headlines twisted the gesture. President kicks. Trevor! The truth sank deeper. The audience, once laughing, now replayed the footage without sound, questioning what they had laughed at and why. But behind the scenes, the story had begun much earlier. Trevor's writers had prepared loaded questions. Internal emails later exposed their tone. He's serious. Hit him with something spicy. Make it viral. In the dressing room, Ibrahim had overheard a producer joke, "Hope he doesn't bring a machete." He hadn't reacted then, but every word etched itself into the moment that followed. Meanwhile, an intern, barely noticed among the crew, had journaled the entire night's prep, noting how the producers planned to poke the lion. Her private notes, once leaked, exposed a pattern. Black leaders, especially those who spoke against the West, were framed as absurd, with smiles. Narration revealed how Trevor, once a voice against systemic racism, had slowly drifted into the orbit of the very systems he had once condemned. The show had begun to use humor, not to liberate, but to contain. That night, as social media boiled over, Traoré's past began surfacing not through curated bios, but through citizen-led threads, videos, and testimonies. A teacher from Burkina Faso posted a clip of a rural school built under Traoré's reforms. A woman shared her brother's story, how he'd received medical care through military outreach. These stories flooded timelines, not in defense, but in truth-telling. The confrontation had unmasked the bias in framing, the subtle racism of who gets to joke and who becomes the joke. A week passed. A week. The network remained silent, releasing vague statements. Trevor didn't speak, but the world did. Op-eds dissected the moment. Was it a literal kick? No. But what did it represent? Commentators argued over it on panels, but the people outside, the studios, understood. It was a rupture, a wound long ignored. Journalists unearthed older interviews where Trevor had interrupted African women, misrepresented statistics, turned trauma into punchlines. The laughter that once shielded him now echoed as guilt. Meanwhile, Traoré refused all interview requests. He was seen walking through rural villages, surrounded not by cameras but by children. A photo went viral, him kneeling to tie a boy's shoelaces. The caption read, "The only boots that matter." Back at the studio, Trevor watched it alone. He had begun avoiding his staff, skipping rehearsals. The writer's room, once alive with sarcasm, now felt haunted. Old jokes lost their charm. One producer quit. "We broke something," she whispered. In a moment of private reflection, Trevor stared into the mirror backstage. For the first time, he saw not a comedian, but a man who had laughed to protect his privilege. He didn't recognize himself, The world was now waiting. An independent African news collective invited both men to a forum. Trevor declined. Traoré accepted. The event was live-streamed globally. No stage, no lights, just a circle of youth from across the diaspora. Traoré sat among them, not above. He listened more than he spoke. When asked about the interview, he said calmly, "Silence has power, but not all silence is weakness." A young man stood up, tears in his voice. "I grew up laughing at my own people, because that's what the world taught me was acceptable." Ibrahim's reply echoed, "When you laugh too long at your own scars, you forget who cut you." The audience didn't clap. They wept. The camera lingered on faces, young, tired, awakening. Meanwhile, Trevor finally reappeared in a closed-door interview overseas. No studio audience. Just one reporter. His voice was flat. "I thought I was exposing irony. Turns out I was protecting it." He admitted the jokes were pre-approved, that he felt pressure to maintain the show's image. "It wasn't until the silence fell that I realized I had been speaking over it all my life." He paused, then added, "He didn't need to shout. That's what broke me." Across platforms, people started quoting that line. A month later, the network announced the indefinite suspension of the show. Sponsors withdrew. A documentary surfaced, compiled by a group of student filmmakers. It chronicled how laughter had been used as control. Interviews, breakdowns, and reactions painted the portrait of an institution that forgot empathy. Trevor's reputation split. Some clung to his old work. Others, especially in the global South, called it a reckoning long overdue. The final nail came quietly. A charity event hosted by Trevor was poorly attended. A video showed him arriving, greeted only by a half-hearted handshake. No laughter, no cameras, just quiet. He stood in front of a podium, looked at the empty seats, and left without speaking. The same night, Traoré appeared at a school graduation in Burkina Faso. He wore no medals, only a simple jacket. He handed diplomas with both hands. One student hugged him and whispered something. He smiled, said nothing. But the photo, that embrace, would become the cover of a book titled Kicking Silence. Trevor retreated from public life. Occasionally, he posted book recommendations. One included Pedagogy of the Oppressed. The caption read, "I wish I'd read this before I spoke so much." His comment section was torn. Some mocked, others forgave. But a majority asked, who gets to come back, and who never gets to leave? Years later, a mural appeared in Johannesburg. It showed two figures, one seated, laughing, the other standing, silent. No labels, just a boot print on the floor between them. No one could forget what it symbolized. Traoré, when asked about the incident at a UN panel, only said, "Sometimes, a single step echoes louder than 1,000 microphones." He moved on, focusing on rebuilding, not reacting. The world didn't shift in a day, but it paused. Late-night shows altered formats. Writers' rooms diversified. Satire was re-examined. And Trevor? He published a short essay. It didn't try to justify. It ended with this: "I mistook my seat at the table as proof that the table was fair. I learned, too late, that the laughter around me had always been someone else's pain." It was read aloud at universities, discussed in forums, not as an apology, but a reckoning. And so, the kick that wasn't a kick echoed not in screams or riots, but in classrooms, living rooms, and memories. It reminded the world that dignity doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply rises, steps forward, and taps the table to wake the room. And when it does, everything changes.